Welcome to the Revenue Rewired podcast, hosted by StringCan Interactive's visionary CEO, Jay Feitlinger, and no-nonsense COO, Sarah Shepard. We're here to accelerate your revenue and give your marketing purpose. Well, I'm so happy that you're here to listen to this episode of the Revenue Rewired podcast. As you know, we're trying really hard to talk about revenue, specifically as it ties into marketing and sales departments, which are seen as mortal, bitter enemies. And we're really trying to change the narrative on that. So in this episode, Jay and I have a little bit of hilarious banter, but we give marketers a little bit of responsibility for some of the things that are happening in their worlds that they're not loving. But we also talk about how other leaders and department heads can really misuse their marketing resources. So we hope you enjoy this episode and enjoy your feedback time. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this next episode of the Revenue Rewired podcast with myself, Sarah Shepard, and Jay Feitlinger. Hello, Jay.
Hello, Sarah.
Happy day.
You too.
Beautiful outside. So happy here.
Little
So
raining.
happy that we are going to talk about some pretty awesome topics. Like today, we're going to get sassy. We are marketers. However, it's going to be a little bit of a bittersweet topic, I think, right? A little bitter pill to swallow maybe for some marketers, but it's some tough love and you need to hear it. So, is your marketing team driving revenue or requests? And so, Jay, we think about marketing differently because of our histories, which is really positive. But we see marketing teams struggle a lot, and there are a lot of different reasons. But this one is probably, I would dare say, one of the most pervasive. And it's that the marketing team is getting bogged down by a lot of stuff. So let's open it up with talking about how the marketing team is really a revenue driver. Like, I kind of want to work a little bit backwards. Like, I don't know that all of our listeners would understand how marketing drives revenue. A lot of them view it as a cost center.
I love that. Well, I think again, looking back at a lot of our clients, and again, I've seen this happen in companies of all types and sizes. So it's not just the smaller businesses. And I'm trying to reflect a little bit on why this continues to happen with some of our clients where they hire some pretty impressive marketing leaders and then they bog them down with things that I don't understand why they're falling in, their laps. I'll never forget that example I shared with you recently where one of our clients who's got, gosh, probably 25 years of experience, similar to me in marketing, and one of the executives asked her help with thinking about the smell of the janitorial supplies. And I don't even understand how that even got into her world. If she's listening to this, she's probably laughing. But I think that's probably is telling the story about where marketing teams are stuck in execution mode because they're not given, ownership over outcomes. And I just think that's probably where the problem comes into play is that typically the tasks being assigned to marketing are so tactical often. I think companies almost like make marketing a catch-all department where, well, we don't know who else should do this, and it feels like a creative question that someone needs to answer. So it must be a task for marketing. And I just don't think it's fair where marketing teams are bogged down in tactical things and also expected to help drive revenue. It's just too hard to do both, I think, effectively well, especially at the leadership level.
Yeah. I mean, I think we coined this is the churn and burn trap, right? Where marketing was not wired or rewired to own revenue. They're stuck and it's pretty frustrating. But I think what's cool about this episode is we aren't just going to talk about this. We're going to talk about how to fix this, which is one of the biggest challenges because once you get into this cycle, it's kind of like a tornado. It just spins out of control. And it's funny, with people's experience, why is it that you think a lot of these marketing departments and CMOs get bogged down by the minutia? And I come at it from a little different perspective because my role is a lot of that and I enjoy it. but why is that a detriment to marketing? Because I could see a lot of people thinking, well, marketing does a lot of stuff. You're responsible for a lot of stuff. So why is this a bad thing that you guys take care of all the ticky tacky one pagers and flyers and decks and case studies and leave behinds and emails and name any
Janitorial
other
supplies.
janitorial supplies or
Um,
paper towels if as I've been reminded by you guys multiple times to
oh
purchase.
gosh. Oh, you're such a passive aggressive
A little
troublemaker.
bit. A little bit.
It's interesting. I have to say, I think we need to fall on the sword a little bit here. I think we cause part of the problem. And I can say that
We
from a
who?
person, we marketers. Again, like I think, and I'm guilty of this, we speak out of both sides of our mouth. When I reflect on myself, you know, going up the marketing corporate ladder over the last, 25, 30 years, there's been numerous situations where I didn't truly understand sales. And so to avoid me having one more monkey on my back, I would avoid it and be a little passive aggressive. And when I'd be asked when I was younger, in my marketing career to get involved in some more of a revenue driving activities, because I didn't understand it and it scared me, I would think about activity equaling impact, which is not at all the case. And so busy people, when they're feeling insecure, love to get busier with ticky tacky things because some of the revenue conversations are really hard sometimes, especially when you're not the ones talking with customers. So I think on this kind of churn and burn trap, I think we need to take some responsibility that when random activities come up that we know we could solve a lot quicker than other less creative minded type of people, it does feel good delivering value, but it doesn't free up our minds and our time to do some much more impactful things. And so I just think we need to think about it as like when we're being paid for creating noise, we're not creating revenue. And I just think we need to think about it differently. So I think it really needs to start with ourselves is thinking about things differently and figuring out how we can drive value, not from just activity, but also from a revenue point of view.
Mm. Yeah, and I think it feels like a lot of what ends up in marketing's world sometimes is reactive,
Hmm.
which is it's not a horribly evil thing, as a planner and executor of all things organized, I detest that. However, there is like this nimble nature that marketing has to balance this fine line between being strategic and thoughtful and sort of anticipating the future, but being able to pivot really quickly and thinking about trying to live in both worlds. Maybe not equally, but I think there's maybe a level of acceptance that there is some nimbleness, but you also have to have quite a bit of strategy to be able to move things forward. And I think about it in terms of do your marketing assets and efforts compound the opportunities to drive revenue? And if you can't really answer that question with at least some degree of certainty, then you probably need to step back and go, I need to take a closer look at what's going on.
I mean, I love that. I think to your point there's probably some self-preservation going on. And again, this is the reason why we're, at the core of it, why marketing and sales teams should be aligned and aren't, because of that self-preservation mindset where it's like, if the pipeline to generate revenue is dry, I'm not saying maybe desert dry, but not where it needs to be to give you some confidence in hitting goals. I think if the marketing team or individuals feel like they're being busy and they're doing all this activity, now they have that protection where it's not their fault. And I think, if the pipeline is dry, you're just basically running around chicken, with head cut off and you're not really building an engine. And I think that it's like if we take a step back and look at your average day of all the activities you're doing, and you're just, chasing squirrels. And if every activity you're doing, you cannot correlate the connection of I'm doing X and it's going to generate Y, and Y being a revenue producing opportunity. I think you need to ask yourself the question of why am I even doing it in the first place? And let's just stop being doing busy work just to protect ourselves because if leadership team members don't understand what we're doing, doesn't mean it's okay. And that's the part I think I finally realized, I don't know, probably when I launched this business where it's just not fun wasting time on things that aren't producing results.
In some ways, in most ways, I agree with you on that. However, I think one of the things I noticed about marketing as an industry is some things can be tangentially tied to revenue, maybe not directly. And
That's
that
fair.
gets people hung up a lot. Like I'll never forget one of the first jobs I had here was whipping our content department into shape. And a client was like, well, how is this making me money? And I struggled with that conversation and being newish to the industry. I'm like, how does that work? Because, back in what was it, the dot-com bubble, the whole banner ad and revenue making out of nonsense and thin air, I think had trickled down and maybe still hovers over marketing as an antitrust activity that occurred. And I don't know if maybe there's some PTSD from that, but how do you handle those conversations when someone's like, "Well, how does that tie to revenue?" Because to be fair, you can't really say this blog. I mean, you can, but for this conversation to be simplistic, no one's going to say this blog drove me a sale.
Okay, so I see where you're going with that, and I appreciate that perspective, and you are right. But in my mind, and maybe I'm just I don't know, a natural born salesperson. I easily see a correlation. So when I'm talking about like activities, it's just all the nonsense of things that it's like, oh, I wonder if our logo should be changed. It's like maybe, but that's not where maybe your best use of your time is. Things like a blog, I not to be weird, but I think about it like a dating
Too late.
situation. Oh God, here you go. It's getting late. I think about it from a dating point of view where when you're, starting to date someone new, obviously you're putting your best foot forward, but every touch point matters. And so obviously I haven't dated in a long time, been married for many, many years, but it's like between texting and emailing and the thoughtful gestures and, opening up a door for someone, all those little things matter. And so when I think about things like a blog post, I wouldn't expect, and I want to make sure it's clear, I'm not at all saying that a marketing activity needs to immediately correlate into generating bottom line revenue, but it needs to move the needle. It needs to enhance that relationship. And so when it comes to like content marketing, for example, it's like what topic is going to help one address a pain point or concern or obstacle or whatever of our ideal client, and then two, how can we help them proceed or go the next step from there, and what is our point of view? And so yes, like you might need to have, I don't know, 8, 10 plus different touch points before a potential client is saying, I'm interested in having conversation. And yes, it's going to be very, very hard to attribute, step 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 that might have been a blog post or social media or an email of it attributing to the revenue. But if you can look yourself in the mirror and saying, I'm pretty confident that this topic is going to help someone, and it's developing that relationship, again, back to that whole like dating analogy, I think that is a really, really positive revenue producing activity. But yes, you are right to clarify that it's not easy to directly correlate that activity to generating revenue, but it's still very, very important.
But you know what I love that what you said was it's a piece of a larger approach. And that's where I love the way you tied it into like a dating analogy, for example, because it is multiple things. And when they're disparate, which is, I think a little more what we're talking about when it's super churn and burn and someone's just throwing tasks out like candy at a parade, then it's definitely not going to help contribute on the long play to your revenue because it's so churn and burn and it's just doing stuff to do stuff, as we say. So when you're intentional, even something as quote tangential to revenue as a blog is actually helping to drive it.
I love that. And I think to your point, you're helping me real time here, having a kind of a different perspective. So I'm thinking back to myself, J 1.0, whatever, 15, 20 years ago.
Baby J.
Oh, that's cute. I think if someone said to me, if you're going to do anything that's going to take more than half an hour, be able to explain how you believe is going to move someone down that, customer experience journey. And if I couldn't answer that question, then that's where I think I'm possibly wasting time. Because again, I think it's important that if you're touching some level of marketing, and again, it could be everything from creating a simple image to support an email topic, or it could be writing a script for a video, everything in between. You have to understand if you're the one producing that or directing it, that I know how this is going to help that, furthering of the process. And so that's what I was trying to talk to, and I was probably getting ahead of myself here before, but that's the part that I worry about is I just see so many times when I'm speaking to, up and coming, marketing people or even marketing team members that are clients, when I'm seeing them doing what I'll call busy work, and when I'm asking questions, not trying to be condescending, but understanding why they're trying to do it because it might reveal a new strategy that I'm not aware of. If they're like, I was told to do this, and then if I talk to the person that told them to do it and they're like, well, we just think we should do it, like there's no strategy to it, that's what makes me cuckoo. And that's what I was trying to communicate in that last part is I just think that before we can start complaining and pointing fingers, look in the mirror and make sure that we're, doing really strategic work.
Yeah, and what you're talking about is sort of, when we read Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, that's popping into my head is, yeah, you could get a task thrown at you that doesn't make sense, but you still have enough, autonomy to say, hey, how does this fit in? Can I ask some questions? One of the notes we have for ourselves is like, if marketing doesn't know what disqualifies a lead, then marketing is so detached from the process and it goes terribly awry in both directions. So here's our bittersweet spin on the other half is marketers are half responsible for some of this, when it does occur and they're being asked to churn and burn. Um, we did promise our listeners that we would help them fix this. So, what are maybe two tips that we could give to help the marketing team drive revenue and not just requests?
And I love that. And I think that'd be kind of a good formula for us to follow maybe for future shows. Because I know that if I was listening to this, I would appreciate, okay, I recognize that I'm part of the problem, but then I think it does require other leadership team members to embrace this. And so again, if you're a marketing leader and you're struggling with some of this stuff, you might want to maybe share this episode or the show with others to listen to help support you. But I think to answer your question, okay, I'll try to limit to two. You actually kind of already addressed one, and I'll kind of
I'll
just
take credit.
add. Okay, good job. I'll give some credit. I'll give us some context there. Is that you know when I think about again my personal journey and others that I've seen have great success in marketing, the ones that are really embracing and empathetic to what it feels like being a salesperson, I think are the ones that perform the best. And so, you know, the marketing people who are managing campaigns often feel like they're living in a black hole where they just don't know what's working, what's not. All they just hear about is the end results regarding how much revenue the sales team produced. And then you could take credit or not for that. But how much more powerful would it be if you could get feedback on why a lead, for example, was disqualified. And then you take that data and then you improve your campaigns and fix it. Because there's nothing worse, and I've been there too many times to count, where we do a 3 or 6 month, flight, marketing campaign, and we hear, 3 months after the campaign is done that it was either a major success or a major failure. And it's like we ask questions why, and it's like no one can give you context. And so how am I expected to do a better job the next time without not knowing it? So, again, I don't love being overly pushy, but this is one of the areas that I tend to be quite pushy on is I hate being part of the problem. I want to be part of the solution. And I don't want to play that, weird telephone game where it's getting passed through 19 different people and 4 different CRM systems. And then I have to decipher that it was marked as a bad lead and I have no idea why. So that's the first thing I just think is that marketing people need to really engage with the sales team in a real life situation to understand what went well and didn't go well so they can improve the campaign. And then I think, from a second side, which kind of ties into that, is I've gotten significant buy-in, not just, being part of StringCan, but also in past marketing jobs, because I spoke the language of salespeople. And so what I did that really worked well because, again, for me to ask them to tell me the details, because again, I put myself in their shoes, just like marketing people are self-preserving their jobs, I bet you salespeople are doing the exact same thing and maybe even worse because, they're so tied to quota and their compensation. And so the sooner you can earn their trust, the more open they're going to be to sharing you the good, bad, and the ugly. And so I think if you could speak their language by, for example, tying every tactic into, win rates and retention rates and annual revenue and all those things and not focus on like website page views or something like that. Because again, I've been in those meetings where we have clients that I love that let us have a seat at the table when they have their sales meetings. And then I watch the marketing person get up and they present this, 35 beautiful slide deck. And it's all about, website features and page views. And these are our 5 best blogs. And all I see the salespeople rolling their eyes being like, how the heck does this help me? Because at the end of the day, not to sound rude, but a typical salesperson is just caring about how much money they're making. And they don't care that the website got 1,200% increase in page views. So I think as a marketer, I'm not saying, be fake, but if you can try to speak their language and tie all the things you're doing into their results, I think you're going to have much better success.
Yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with in the right way. If a person's motivations are X, help them use their motivations. Like salespeople that are great are rare and a hot commodity. And being able to maintain that salesperson, for example, is also a retention technique. And I don't know that you were making it seem that way, but my brain couldn't help but go there. Where if the marketing team acts as an extension and a support arm for sales, you are not only helping bring a fantastic revenue stream into your organization, but you're also keeping it by not having to retrain your salespeople over and over and over again, because it's probably one of the biggest departments for churn because it's so stressful. It's
Mm-hmm.
so hard and it's always changing. And if marketing and sales could maybe like commiserate for a minute and realize you both are trying to do great things, and marketers kind of use the motivation of the salesperson. Like, I think that's fantastic because you're speaking their, love language or language of appreciation. So I
I
think
love
marketing
that.
is under leveraged a lot.
Yeah, and I think to your point, and we already kind of touched on this a little bit, but maybe to kind of wrap up, this part of this show is, again, that janitorial supply example, unfortunately, is a real situation that happened to us. And, back to my comment earlier about the, speaking from both sides of our mouth, I'm very obviously very empathetic towards marketing people. And I just, it hurts me when I see either departments not working well together. But to be fair to the marketing team, if you're an executive and not connected to marketing or sales departments, or if you're in the sales department and you're just throwing over the fence these random service task requests to the marketing team, one, they'll do it and they'll probably do a great job, but you can't also expect them to be thinking like a revenue driver. And that's the part I think it just seems so unfair to me where if you wanted them to be a task, producing machine and just popping out, new deck slides and random enhancements to collateral and whatever you need for conferences and all the things, and you aren't asking them to give you creative, ideas and ways to improve it, or you don't explain to them how the sausage is being made, I think it's not fair to treat them, like them being needing to be a revenue driver, because you get the wrong results. And so I think to your point there, it'd be super amazing as if both of those two departments, marketing and sales, put themselves in another person's shoes and thought about a more effective way to approach it. Again, from the sales side, if I was a leader in sales, I needed help with a conference, I would approach the marketing team very differently. I wouldn't just email them and saying, hey, take that last deck you did and change these 4 slides and here's all the things. And it's like I micromanage the whole thing. Instead, I would ask for a meeting and be like, hey, here's what I'm thinking. You have obviously a very creative mind as a marketing leader. I'd love to get your perspective on what we can do differently. And maybe the marketing person would be like, let me do some research. And they look into some of our competitors and look at past, trade show events and seeing, who did what, and make sure you're coming across as being, unique and different. And that's where I think there's so much potential, to your point, where those two departments have the most potential besides the customer, service team, of driving revenue growth if they work together. But if they work separately, they might get there, but it might be a lot bumpier road.
Yeah, I mean, chicken egg though, like your customer service and retention teams can't retain clients they don't have. And I think that's a good place to wrap up is on my good point. Uh, we really enjoyed talking about like revenue in marketing, because it's not often put together. And so making sure that marketing gets out of the weeds, it's looking at strategy, it's tying to outcomes and appropriate KPIs, is probably one of the best ways to get your team to drive revenue. So we really loved having you guys on this episode of Revenue Rewired. So thank you, Jay.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks,
All right,
everyone.
you guys have a great day.
Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to the Revenue Rewired podcast. Send us your questions to podcast@stringcaninteractive.com and follow us for more insights to drive your business forward.